Welcome, critters! I'm Claire Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we discuss and examine critical role episodes, plot lines, characters, and players through the lens of sacred reading practices. This particular episode is about Campaign 1, Episode 28, Part 2. And joining me today is Petall.
Hello.
So, the icebreaker that I have for today is, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live?
That's a very good question. In some ways, I'm very happy where I'm already living, but I think if I could choose to live anywhere, I'd probably want to live like closer to where like some of my internet friends live. Um, and it would make travel for the conventions that I go to so much easier because like I go to Gen Con and I want to go to PAX Unplugged this year, and so they're so far away.
Yeah.
But it's the people that I'm going there for. So I think I'd still want to live in Canada, but maybe like further east Canada that I'm currently living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I honestly am kind of stumped by this question as well. Like, I want to put different portions of different parts of the world together and create my
Yeah.
like, I was almost going to say London, but it's not a good environment at the moment, politically,
No.
culturally, that kind of stuff. But I love London as a city. But, I love where I am right now, too, in the Pacific Northwest. But maybe like New Zealand, Australia, maybe? Like maybe one of the cities in that area. Like I'm not going to be fighting kangaroos or
Mm-hmm.
like that. But if I could, like, put them all together into one utopia.
Yeah. Like if I could have my city, but just move it closer to my friends,
Yeah,
like that would be
yeah,
the ideal world. And
yeah,
also make my city cheaper to live in because it's pretty
yeah,
expensive. One
yeah.
of the most expensive places in Canada right now. So I'm like, maybe make it a little cheaper.
Yeah, yeah. I came across a Facebook post of mine. Like, Facebook reminded me of one that was back from, like, I think it was like 2015-ish. And I was complaining about how I couldn't find a one bedroom for under $700 a month.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, honey, I'm
Oh,
paying more than double that at the moment.
yeah.
And it was only like, what, 8 years ago, 9 years ago at this point. Like,
Hmm.
it's gotten ridiculous. But yeah, if I could somehow create my own city, that would be the ideal situation.
Yeah.
So please join us as we embark on this exciting adventure in story analysis and self-reflection in order to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. As always, we love hearing your own insights and stories as well. So please comment, like, share below. And ready? All right, let's dive in. As they open the second half of this episode, Vox Machina is in the process of traveling to Whitestone in order to gather information about the Briarwoods, the two individuals responsible for the death of Percy's family. They are nearly there as they spy the Whitestone Castle in the distance, and Keyleth and Vex ask if Percy knows any secret passages that they could use. He says there's one located at the western base of the mountain that the castle is built on, the same one that he and his sister Cassandra used to escape the castle several years ago. They discuss their options for a bit and decide to scope out the town itself before heading for the castle. After traveling through the forest to the northwest of the city for about 2 more hours, they hear the distant sound of howling. Keyleth recognizes the source as a pack of 5 or 6 wolves and thinks it's strange that they're howling while the sun is still up. Percy suggests climbing into the trees to hide, as they still have a few hours of travel before they reach Whitestone proper, and the sun is close to setting, and they want to avoid any vampiric activity during the nighttime hours. Keyleth turns into an eagle, grabs Scanlan, and flies towards Whitestone while the rest of them climb into the trees. Looking down from the treetops, Vex sees the pack of wolves, or dogs, or some sort of thing, followed by a humanoid of some sort. Vex decides to cast Pass Without a Trace on them, and they stay still and silent as the pack gets closer. One of the canines does sniff the air before returning to the rest of them. She uses her favorite terrain skills and manages to see that the humanoid is female, but she can't determine her race or any other details. Percy takes a look as well, rolling a natural 20 on the golden snitch, but doesn't recognize her. He can tell that it's a woman in her late 40s or early 50s carrying a short bow and quiver of arrows over one shoulder, and she appears to be hunting for food. Eventually, the hunting party leaves, apparently not noticing the group hidden in the treetops. As Keyleth and Scanlan fly to Whitestone, they see the flock of crows circling the town, passing over the entire valley. When the pair reaches the outskirts of the walls, Scanlan casts invisibility on them both. Now unable to see the eagle he's actually riding on, he holds on tightly, and from their aerial viewpoint, they can see farmland just outside the city, as well as an area used for cutting timber. They see some people in town, but really not a lot. Many of the buildings are closed, and most of the people they see are out working in the fields. Circling to the center of the town, they do see a large old tree with twisted and gnarled branches, and remember that Desmond, the Briarwood's carriage driver that they had captured in Amman, mentioned something called the Sun Tree. Getting closer, they see that there are 8 humanoid bodies of varying ages swinging from the branches. They also notice 6 giants slowly patrolling through the city that seem to be undead giants. The citizens of the town keep a very wide berth as the giants pass and do their best to avoid them. Eagle, Keyleth, and Scanlan finish their initial loop around the city, and Keyleth drops Scanlan off on a wall near the farmlands. Scanlan leaves a canteen on the wall where she is because they're still invisible and he needs to be able to find her again. He spends a whole 12 minutes climbing down the 25-foot wall and then moves to the edge of the fields. The crops being harvested looked withered, and the farmers look frustrated and gaunt. Scanlan overhears 2 of the people muttering to each other, saying that they have to fill up their carts on time. When they can't do that, the older man becomes nervous and says, Sir Carrion's going to have my hide, and gives a quick prayer to Pelor for protection. The workers take the carts back into the town, and Scanlan hurries back to the wall as the sun begins to set behind the mountains. And after another 15 minutes of trying to climb back up, he fails, and then lets his invisibility spell dissipate and uses Dimension Door to get back to the top of the wall. He picks up his canteen, hops onto Eagle Keyleth's back, and recasts invisibility on them both. Keyleth takes off, heading back to the rest of the party. Meanwhile, back in the forest, Grog is snoring in his tree and then falls out of it. Vex has spent some time examining her new bow and identifies it as the longbow of Sky Sentinel. She restrings it with the blazing bowstring, and Vex tries on Clarota's helmet, which he affectionately calls the calamari hat. Vex and Grog tease him over its appearance, and he somehow has a Loki mullet now going on. Just as the party is getting nervous about how long it's been, Keyleth and Scanlan return, their invisibility wearing off as they swoop down. Keyleth returns to her normal form and uses Druidcraft to make some hammocks out of spiderwebs for them in the trees. Vex uses hide in plain sight to disguise them even further. Vex mentions the robe of infinite twine, and Vex pulls it out and uses it to reinforce the spiderweb for Grog's hefty size. Then Keyleth also teases Vex a bit about his new helmet. Scanlan reports on what he and Keyleth saw in Whitestone, miserable human citizens, as well as, zombie giants. He proposes disguising Vox Machina as a group of farmers delivering produce to the castle in order to sneak in. Keyleth tells Percy that the farmers mentioned Sir Carrion and also about the 8 bodies hanging from the Sun Tree. Vex wonders why they call it the Sun Tree, and the rest of the party echoes her. Percy tells them the story of it, saying that legends say that before the castle was built, the journey into the valley was treacherous and stormy, and the original builders of Whitestone Castle feared they'd die. But this one great tree stood in the valley, and it was underneath it that they took shelter. And as they began to take shelter, the storm broke, and the storm did not return until the castle was completed. He says that they hold their festivals at the Sun Tree every year, and Vex adds now it's being used as a gallows. He explains that to the citizens of Whitestone, the tree was representative to them as a guardian of Pelor, the god of sun and protector of light and holiness. They discuss the implications of this for a bit, and several members decide that the reason behind the sun tree being defiled is due to its relationship to the sun god and a vampire's weakness to sunlight. Keyleth asks Scanlan if he can contact Pike in any way. Vax asks Keyleth if she could revive the tree. She says she could. Scanlan is very skeptical of this plan, though, saying that arbory is always the best option. Percy proposes going into town the next morning to search for allies. Vax suggests that reviving the sun tree could help motivate the psyche of the townsfolk. Grog makes a very misinformed suggestion that they pee on the tree to help it grow. They discuss cutting the bodies down and healing the tree and going from there. Keyleth mentions that the ritual to revive the tree would take some time, up to 8 hours, for the greatest effect. Scanlan protests that healing the tree doesn't matter because none of them know anything about Pelor anyway. Percy is not religious, but he does know that Pelor, the god of sun and agriculture, has a strong following in Whitestone, with approximately 3/4 of the population having a good opinion of the deity. Keyleth suggests that she try and reach out to Pike and ask her to reach out to Sarenrae, who will then reach out to Pelor. Vax says that the Briarwoods would not be able to have as strong of a hold on the town if the sun tree is revived, which is why it is now dead. He says that Scanlan needs more faith and that he should support the plan to revive it. But Scanlan asks, and then what? He says they're going to fight a million monsters to heal a tree and then say what? Bring out the sun? Keyleth asks Percy to repeat his plan of rallying the townsfolk. He says he wants to sneak in, revive the tree, and form a rebellion. He says that they take out the zombie giants one by one, quietly, and Scanlan asks if they're going to be insurgents. Percy says they need to subtly spread the word and gather allies among the townsfolk. Scanlan decides he does like this plan, and then Percy spends some time making a parchment burn scar, something to leave a mark or the mark of the resistance. So Scanlan says he needs a beret. Overnight, Grog snaps his hammock and falls to the ground once again, while Vax throws pine cones at him. The next morning, Scanlan scries to check on Greyskull Keep. He sees Lena in the kitchen, yawning and preparing breakfast for the guards, who are conversing in the next room. He then tries to scry on Pike, but can't seem to make the connection. It seems that the only most recent scrying mark can be used. They briefly discuss the potential of Scanlan scat grenades in order to spy. Then the party makes their way through the forest and arrives at the outskirts of Whitestone. Vex casts Pass Without a Trace, and Scanlan uses seeming to make them appear to be a group of dirty, ragged peasants with Trinket disguised as a donkey. They stealth their way into the western side of town, heading toward the center. They get a few strange looks from the townsfolk, but no one does or says anything to them. Vax does pull one of the passerby aside and asks about finding work, but the woman sadly tells them that they shouldn't be here. One of the zombie giants does come close, but they avoid it. Walking through the city, Percy notices that the population has significantly decreased since he last saw it. The citizens that he does see are in poor health, and there are several buildings that have been abandoned for a long time. The oil lanterns placed throughout the city have also been shattered and broken. Percy expresses interest in checking out the cemetery on the eastern side of the town, and the group makes it safely to the edge of the town square and sees the sun tree. Its branches are drooping and there are no leaves left on it. Keyleth does a nature check and notices that it is not an indigenous tree, guessing that it was either transplanted or there was some magical source reason for its becoming into, reality. They see the silhouettes of 8 figures swinging from the branches, so Percy leads the group closer to the sun tree. They try to move casually, but sneak looks at the hanging bodies, and Percy and Vax notice that the body on the far right is smeared with red paint and wearing a dirtied green robe. To the left is a child dressed in fine purple silk shirt and pantaloons. To the left of that is a female wearing greens and browns with red paint in her hair. Percy walks away at this point. And to the left of that previous figure is another woman dressed in dark black and brown furs and leathers with dark hair. Next to her is a similarly dressed man with long dark hair. To the left of that is a large man with a mostly bare chest, head-shaped bald, and dark scars across his face. And to the left of that is a recently hunted bear. Vox Machina realizes that the bodies hanging from the sun tree are effigies of themselves. Each body has been dressed and colored purposefully to send a message to them, and Keyleth is able to tell that the bodies have been there for at least a week. The party finds an abandoned tavern with the doors chained shut at the edge of the town square and sneak in through the window. Everything inside is covered in dust and hasn't been used in a long time. The tavern has both a second floor and a cellar, so they scope things out, and Scanlan covers the first floor windows with some old rags as Keyleth uses Move Earth to begin to dig a tunnel from the cellar to the roots of the sun tree, and Vex goes along with her. Bax and Grog stay up on the ground floor to keep watch. Percy crafts a parchment burn scar arrow ? Using a piece of parchment soaked in his black powder and wrapped around an arrow, somewhat successfully, in the hopes of being able to create a burn mark sometime in the future at a distance. Keyleth's digging eventually brings her to some thick roots that continue to burrow down past her tunnel. She touches the roots and casts Speak with Plants, but gets no response. Apparently, the sun tree is dead. Keyleth prepares a hero's feast for the party and then begins casting plant growth over the next 8 hours in an attempt to revive the tree. And that's where they end for the episode. So, what do we think of the second half?
This is, I mean, I almost don't have words. I should have it, but this is really, truly
Horrifying?
horrifying, yes. But like also this really feels like where the campaign begins. Like where that hook is. Like
Yeah.
that sun tree moment. And
Oh my
it's of
God.
course like emphasized by the fact that like this is where people start watching because it's the first episode after Orion. So people often skip the first episodes and start here. But this just feels like such a big, important, significant episode, particularly that moment with the sun tree and the bodies and everything.
I get goosebumps every single time I watch
Same.
this. Like, because the group has no idea what they're looking at. Like, it takes them so
No.
long. And, like, same with the chat. Like, everyone who's watching this is like, oh, it's Percy's family. Oh, it's Percy's family. And everyone's like, no, they'd be skeletons at this point. And there's like a bunch of arguing back and forth in the chat. And it's Marisha who first realizes what they're
Yeah.
looking at. And she's like, no, 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 no. She's like, do not say what I'm thinking. Do not say what I'm thinking. And man, I get goosebumps every single time. And you're right,
Yeah.
this is the time where it's that visceral hook into the story. Like,
Yeah.
this is Matt being his most diabolical.
Absolutely.
You're right. I mean, this is the beginning of us being like on the edge of our seats with this, because we're finally getting that emotional, visceral, like, oh my God, what just happened moment.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're hooked.
Yeah. Yeah, we really truly are.
My dog found a toy. Behind her in the background. Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is the beginning of the big, big, big arcs.
Yeah, it really is. Before there were like mini arcs and smaller adventures, but this is where like we're really starting to see this like overarching plot, and like this isn't just like hunting a dragon in Vasselheim. This is bigger than that.
And it's funny to say that because dragons are fucking big.
It's true.
Dragons are fucking big deals, you know what I mean? And like they've already fought a beholder at this point.
Yeah.
Like I feel like they and everyone who's watching already thought that they'd seen the big bad at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we've already gotten betrayed by Clarota. We've already, triumphed over a beholder and a city of Ithalids who are chasing after you. We've already fought a Rakshasa. We've already fought the ice dragon. Like, we've already hit those big D&D milestones.
Yeah.
And so I think that this more subtle threat that they're now facing took everyone off guard.
Oh yeah, and it's so much more personal because like yeah, there were of course like they considered Clarota a friend, but like they had just met him like earlier in that little adventure, and like yeah, fighting a dragon is big, but that was basically just a side quest. What makes this so different is just how personal it is, and then the bodies in the Sentry really drive that home because it's like, oh, this is not just a danger to Whitestone, not just another place to go and save. This is personal. This is a threat to us, particularly Percy, but like a threat to all of them.
This is what takes the stream from just another D&D game to what we know as Critical Role.
Exactly.
Because the reason why we don't just pass it off as another D&D stream, because yes, they were one of the first to come to notoriety as a D&D stream, but they rose to the top of the pile very quickly and became the juggernaut that they are because of this emotional, subtle hook. Because it turns from just a game that these, nerds are playing to an emotionally wrenching storyline that Matt, just the genius that he is, continues to this day.
Exactly. And like this moment, I won't go into details obviously, but like this moment with the Sentry has ripples like even in like the current campaign, like campaign 3
This is the first
today.
time I've rewatched that episode since the new campaign started, and I was like, oh my god. Yeah,
It adds so many
spoilers,
layers
but
to it.
so many layers, so many layers. And it's funny, like after our last episode for the podcast, I was thinking about how much you were talking about how easy the group dynamic seems. And I was also struck by watching the second half how quiet it is as well.
Yeah.
Like there's not that much side table talk. And especially now that they're getting to the days where they don't do a lot of eating on the stream either, there's not a lot of distraction from the story. There's not a lot of external noise going on.
Yeah, and they seem a lot more focused. I think they too, even before the Sentry, since they're going to Percy's hometown and dealing with like this big heavy thing for Percy, and Percy isn't like acting like how they've known him to be and all these things. Like they're realizing just how serious it is, and you can see that in the tone.
Yeah, and that almost makes it more impactful, the story beats that we are seeing, because it's almost on a blank stage.
Yeah.
Like the audience has quieted, the eaves of the stage have quieted, the setting is very minimalistic, but then we're hit with this huge emotional beat. And everyone is like, oh my god, what just happened? Like, this is not normal D&D.
No.
It's, I think about this all the time. Like, it's the beginning to using D&D as a vehicle more so than an endpoint.
Exactly. And I really honestly think that that moment with the Sentry is probably one of like the most key, like one of the top moments in all of Critical Role. And we're hitting it here in episode 28 of campaign 1.
Yeah.
And it's so significant that it's still to this day one of the most big and impactful scenes like it doesn't get overshadowed by anything in the other campaigns. It still maintains that gravity.
Yeah, yeah. Like I even saw Liam brushing some tears away when they all realized what was going on. Like
Hmm.
everyone had their own reactions, and it was just fascinating to watch because Keyleth's the one that picked it up once they got to the bear. She was like, her mouth drops open and she's just like, what are we looking at? Like, you cannot
Yeah.
tell me that what I'm thinking we're looking at is actually what we're looking at. And
Yeah.
then Vex reacts next. And then, like, it's just kind of a rippling effect that's going on.
Hmm.
It's incredible.
It really is.
And I think they're also getting to the stage where they're taking it more seriously, like we've said before. And
Hmm.
so their nuanced levels of strategy are also starting to come out.
Absolutely.
Because Sam slash Scanlan has always been one of those players slash characters who pushes for the sake of improving their plans. Like he's always the first to reject the initial plans that
Yeah.
come out because he wants them to be better. But I think he's doubling down on that in this episode
Hmm.
as well. Because he's like, no, guys, like, we really need to think about that. We've got 6 undead giants roaming around town. We've got
Yeah.
an unknown number of vampires. We don't
Yeah.
know where they are, what they're doing, what they know, what they don't know. And so they have to be very, very careful going into this.
Absolutely.
Well, any personal experiences coming to mind?
Well, another thing that really struck me is that just like these first shots of Whitestone and seeing how much of a like terrible place it has become. It brought to mind as I was watching it like the moments when when you have something that's really important to you and then like something happens and then all of a sudden that thing is like ruined, and like you can't view it the same way. It's not the same. Instead of bringing those like emotions of joy, it brings like all of these negative emotions instead.
Hmm.
That's kind of what it reminded me of, is like those moments after like a traumatic experience or something like that, when like that trauma impacts how you view things, and then but the returning to it and being ready to return to it and the like trying to fix it and make it what it was, and that's kind of what stood with me mostly throughout this part of the episode.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about recently I went to college down in Florida, and recently in the last year or two, my college town actually got hit by a hurricane.
Oh wow.
And so I got to see pictures and videos of well-known landmarks that I knew destroyed.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit. Like, that's just something that being so removed from it as well, just,
Mm-hmm.
it just felt like I felt helpless. I felt saddened. I felt angry, all of those emotions. And I imagine that that's what Percy is feeling right now.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting to be confronted with that kind of stark difference. It really puts things into perspective
Mm-hmm.
because they don't really know what they're walking into.
Yeah.
Like they tried to prepare for this. Like they looked
But
up,
there's no way you could be prepared for something like this.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they looked up vampires and like bought a bunch of steaks and mirrors. And that's pretty much it up until this point. And I think that that's why they spent so much of this second half too arguing about their plan too.
Mm-hmm.
is because I don't know if there is a right answer in this.
Yeah, it's a sort of thing where it's so big and so overwhelming, and it like there's so many emotions tied up with it and everything that it's like it changes things. This isn't, as I said, another like monster hunting side quest or something. This isn't a like quest given by the Slayer's take. This is it hits home, it's personal, it's big. There are could be some really damaging real consequences that hit close to home if things get out of hand. It's not like, oh, maybe it'll be like a little harder to kill a dragon, maybe like one of us will get badly injured or maybe die. It's like, no, this whole hometown that is significant to this one person and has already been destroyed could like be lost forever.
Because they're not doing this for money.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the first thing that they've done in this campaign that wasn't for money.
Yeah.
At least on the stream. You know, we don't know pre-stream, but I think that puts it in a different perspective, especially for like not only the players and characters who are living this, but for the audience as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are so steeped in this capitalistic world that we live in. How many things do we do personally that is not tied to money?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to do things without it being tied to money in some way or another, just in the system that we live in.
So that brings morality into the picture in a
Mm-hmm.
way that I think Keyleth has been trying to do for a
Yeah.
while now, but being confronted with effigies of yourself hanging from a tree and knowing that you were responsible for the death of 8 people and a bear,
Mm-hmm.
including a child,
Yeah.
their whole priorities are shifting now.
Absolutely. This is for moral and personal reasons. It's not just to get paid. It's not for like a fun little adventure. This becomes something that they have to do. And
I
it's
mean,
kind of the moment that I think also starts to set them on the track to becoming like the heroes that they become, because before they were just trying to survive, they were just going through the world, they were taking jobs, doing whatever, and like, but now this is the moment where they start on the path to becoming the heroes of this story.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about other campaigns now, like where they confronted with similar quandaries. Like I know the Mighty Nine were definitely in terms of like saving Knott's husband. Did Bell's Hells ever get that beyond like revenge for certain party members' deaths?
Yeah, and it's hard to say because Bell's Hells, like, I mean, their story isn't over, it's still ongoing. It's hard to see what the full arc is when we're still
Mm-hmm.
in the midst of it. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're also seeing that in our real world right now,
Oh
also.
yeah, I wanted to when there was a good gap talk about like what's going on right now with Palestine. Like just seeing like this city so destroyed is reminding me of all the like the genocide that's going on right now, and like the whole like culture and all those buildings and everything that like Palestine is being absolutely obliterated.
Yeah, yeah. And again, we're being forced to make decisions that are not based on money.
Yeah, like all the calls for boycotts for all of these various companies that are helping to fund the genocide
Hmm.
and all of these various things. It's interesting, as you were saying, money dictates so much about a world that one of the biggest things that we can do, as far removed as we are, aside from like calling representatives and all of that sort of stuff and like protesting, is to like show with our money where things are,
Yeah.
like where what we want and
And
what we stand
sometimes
for.
we have to make monetary sacrifices to do that. That's essentially what we're being
Exactly.
asked to do in this situation. And I think that that's also what Vox Machina is being asked to do in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had a moment when I was going through this because Critical Role as a company was kind of slow on the uptake to have any sort of stance on Palestine and the conflict. And I ultimately had some moral quandaries with that when I was like, all
Yeah.
right, what exactly are we supporting here? Because if we look back, I think Keyleth would be pro-Palestine.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think other characters in this whole Critical Role ecosystem would be pro-Palestine. And we're seeing a standard of ethos being set with
Yeah.
second half, which is monumental. Monumental. Like you said, I think this sets the tone for everything we see from here on out, because it's
Mm-hmm.
no longer just a game for shits and giggles, making money, punching dragons, doing the adventurer thing. Instead, it's turned into this moral quandary, this ethics quandary, this thing that makes it so innately personal that they have no choice but to take a stand.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we're seeing that play out in the real world right now.
Yeah. Like this is so significant because this is a genocide that we are literally witnessing with like our own two eyes with the power of the internet. Like a lot of the other major genocides in history, like the internet wasn't around yet. There wasn't this like widespread, undeniable proof that this is what was going on.
Yeah.
Uh, and here we like see it, and like, what do we do with it? Like, how do we stand up and say that this is not okay, especially when it's happening so far away?
Yeah. And I do want to make the statement in terms of commentary, if we do receive it, that we aren't anti-Semitic. We aren't anti, the people. We are actually pro the people in this discussion. And we just don't want to see these lives wasted, just like how Vox Machina doesn't want to see the lives wasted
Mm-hmm.
in Whitestone. And so just to, put the subtext
Mm-hmm.
around this conversation. Um,
Yeah,
because
nobody should be like killed or displaced or anything like that. Nobody should have their culture erased. And it's just kind of like a big part of just like colonialism in general. Like, I don't want us to forget, with the focus just on Palestine, like just like how the countries of the United States and Canada were built and the atrocities that were committed there and the blood and the bones that we stand on just to live our day-to-day lives.
the Briarwoods are colonialists.
It's true.
They
It's
are
basically what they're
colonizing
doing.
Whitestone. Just because it's white v. white doesn't mean that it's not within that terminology. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's very fascinating because there are so many fantasy stories that are based on the concept of fighting against colonialism, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't always frame it within that terminology.
No, and it's also hard because there's a lot of times when tabletop role-playing games do also like enforce that. Like you're going and like fighting monsters and like reclaiming these quote-unquote wild lands from quote-unquote evil races. And I think there's been a lot of movement within the D&D community lately to try to like call this out and be like, hey, there are some aspects of the fantasy genre as a whole that are incredibly racist and incredibly colonial. And how can we do better? And so it's cool to see these like shifts and these moves and everything.
I've been raising the same question about the Bell's Hells campaign with the death of the gods. Like, isn't that another form of genocide as well?
Yeah.
And they also haven't really brought that terminology into the conversation either in
No.
that regard. And I don't think that they would even bring the like colonist terminology into the conversation with the Briarwoods. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, that's what we're looking at the end of the day, is this force, outside forces coming into a pre-established culture, a pre-established people, a pre-established place, and domineering them, conquering them, displacing them, murdering them, all the things that happen with colonialism.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's heavy, heavy stuff. So,
Heavy, heavy stuff.
what are we going to do about it?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to just like constantly be kept in like don't turn your eyes away from what's happening. And look at what you can do to help. Like we're currently, I believe it's the last day of the global strike.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think it was the 21st or the 28th, I think.
yeah, so we're reaching the end of the global strike. So keep an eye out for like future things like that to continue to do, like call representatives, boycott the the companies that are helping to fund this genocide, and do what you can in your little corner of the world to do your part. Continue talking about Palestine and these injustices. Like make sure people are aware of what's going on and that they know that it's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I can add anything to that, honestly. Like, I've been doing as much as possible to keep the flow of information going because I can't, yes, I'm boycotting. Yes, I'm doing as much as I can, but I can't also like donate a ton of money to this cause.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what can I do with my limited resources? And that's also using my platforms to disseminate information, to make sure that information is continuing to be spread, and also having those hard conversations with my friends and my family and being like, let's actually talk about what's going on in this situation and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that we remain aware, because it's all about the grassroots awareness at this point in time, because we can't necessarily trust the main media sources nowadays because
No.
they are so controlled by our capitalistic system that we live
Mm-hmm.
in. And there is a lot of propaganda that's being spread around on both sides, honestly. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a value in consciously and intentionally developing the sense of self discernment and critical thinking in order to constantly search for that truth and
Yeah,
constantly promote what we do believe in our hearts to be the right thing, even if we do have to economically disadvantage ourselves in the process.
exactly. And I also want to say in general too, with the concept of like colonialism and genocide in general, like if you live in like the United States or Canada, like make sure you know the name of the like indigenous nations of the whose land are you living on,
Absolutely.
and make sure try to take those steps to like decolonize yourself. Because yes, what's happening in Palestine is big and important. We absolutely should care about and do what we can, but we also can't ignore that we ourselves are also living in like in countries that
Occupied
are
lands.
occupied lands. Like this happened, we were doing the same thing, our ancestors were doing the same thing, like
Mm-hmm.
not that long ago. And yeah, now we are living with the results. So look into what you can do for like decolonizing your life. That'll look different for everyone because everybody lives in like different places and are living on the lands of different indigenous peoples. But like look and see what you can do to decolonize your own life at home, as well as working to stop this genocide.
Yeah, there's a website called Pay Real Rent, I think. I'm not sure if I'm getting that correct, but there is a site where you can go and basically pay restitution rent to the lands that you now live on, the lands that you now occupy.
I hadn't heard of that.
It's like payrealrent.com or something along those lines. I'm not entirely sure what the full title is, but there you don't have to pay like, the rent that you pay to live, but any amount matters, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so there are ways to pay restitution to these people if our governments aren't necessarily doing that for us.
Exactly.
So it's all about the grassroots nowadays, and it's kind of always been about the grassroots over time because power does have a tendency to corrupt. And I think that that's what we're seeing with the Briarwoods here is like when we
Mm-hmm.
look at the backstory of the Briarwoods, she was a powerful figure in Wildmount prior to this, and
Yeah.
her interests were being refused or suppressed during her time there. And so she just moved until she found a place that her power could expand, her power
Yeah.
could influence, her power could do what she wanted it to do. And
Mm-hmm.
Whitestone is the unlucky recipient of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, how can we continue to fight against the Briarwoods in our own lives?
Exactly. And how can we stop ourselves from being the Briarwoods or working for the
Absolutely.
Briarwoods?
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh man, I didn't expect it to get that heavy. I might have to go have a cry session after this.
That's fair.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is what makes Critical Role the juggernaut that it is in the tabletop role playing community because they aren't afraid to touch on topics like these and explore topics like
Mm-hmm.
these deeply because there is a lot of white supremacism. There is a lot of patriarchy that comes from the history of fantasy.
Yeah,
And I think Critical Role has been a huge influence in changing that.
absolutely. And there's a lot of other podcasts out there too, like Dimension 20 Unprepared Casters are ones that I can think of as well,
Yeah,
who
the Drag
also
Queen
are,
D&D.
yeah, all who are also like really calling out these systems and everything.
I mean, that's what Brennan always talks about is that the real enemy in all of his campaigns is capitalism
Yeah.
at the end of the day. And I think, you know, there were a lot of people contributing to this movement, but I think the juggernaut that is Critical Role helped pave the way for
Oh, absolutely.
this.
Critical Role paved the way for all, like it helps create the genre of actual play.
And they're still
Like,
on their own journey, you know.
mm-hmm.
Like I saw a recent post about how, you know, their live show in London, the audience was entirely white. And I was like, okay, first off, that's not true. But I think the point still stands in that
Mm-hmm.
Critical Role has been very conscious in the last couple of years. They have sensitivity coaches now on staff
Mm-hmm.
they pay to make sure that they're approaching these topics with tact, with sensitivity, with compassion and understanding, and also making the conscious choice of bringing POC into their games and
Absolutely.
guest players.
And of course Critical Role still makes mistakes. That's
Oh yeah.
part of learning and part of things.
I
That's part of
mean,
what we do on this podcast is calling them out when we're like, hey, actually, these moments don't represent things the best.
yeah. I mean, they got called out for having a colonialist overtone intro for
Absolutely.
3, and they responded to it, and they actually changed it as a result of audience feedback. And
Exactly.
you know, we aren't perfect people. No one is perfect. We are all imperfect beings living in an imperfect world. And how can we be better consistently, intentionally with what we have?
Exactly. Especially when you have a platform as big as Critical Role has, or any platform at all. Like what you say, what you depict, the like stereotypes you like you portray, like it has an impact. It's important to think about that impact.
Yeah, yeah. Like just because we're against the Briarwoods doesn't mean we're against all wild mountains. Is that the word that we
I have no
use?
idea.
You know what I mean? It's
Mm-hmm.
we're looking at the colonialists themselves and criticizing them for their specific actions more so than criticizing their entire culture that
Mm-hmm.
came from. And I think that that's also a very important distinction to make, is because each individual's own actions, they need to be held accountable to them more
Absolutely.
so than just blaming a broad swath of people, because that's exactly what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
is blaming the broad swath of Whitestonians. Is I don't know. I'm making up terms at this point. But anything you want to add before we start wrapping up?
I can't think of anything.
Oh man, this is powerful stuff. I'm gonna have to go think about a lot of this. But audience, we definitely encourage you to share your own thoughts and feelings and insights with us as well. We'd love to know how Critical Role episodes like these have impacted you in your own lives. Special thanks to Petall for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As always, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are super important conversations to have in general, in any shape or form, and also using media forms like Critical Role as a jumping off point for these conversations, I think sometimes makes the conversation, I don't know if I want to say easier, but more accessible too.
Accessible is the word that I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So let us know what you think. Do you have parallel experiences? Do you have opposite experiences? You know, this is about spurring these conversations more so than giving you a right and wrong answer, because it is so heavily nuanced that we do have to make these moral decisions for ourselves at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day. So next time we'll be discussing Campaign 1, Episode 29, Part 1, and joining me will be Atlas, so I'm excited for that. As always, I'm looking more for co-hosts and guests, so if you're interested in coming on the series, please reach out. I can't wait to chat with you all. In the meantime, please like, comment, subscribe below, follow us on Tumblr at Sacred Reading CR, and until next time, may all beings be peaceful, may all beings be free, and be the chaotic good you wish to see in the world. Take care, guys.